To start out, I'm going to show you some pictures here on the smartboard. I have about maybe 5 of them to show you. And what I'd like you to do is think in your head how the pictures are all alike. They're the same in one way. And actually, they're like clues. And the last clue is going to be a listening clue. The first ones are watching the smartboard. And then at some point, I'm going to have you close your eyes and just use your ears for the last clue. And then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you have figured out how they all are the same. So here's the first picture. This is actually a photograph that somebody took of this. I won't say what it is. There's the next one. This is a painting by a man named Stuart Davis, and that's actually the man that we're studying today. He's an artist, and he did paintings. This was done with oil painting on canvas. Lots of good shapes there. This is another one by Stuart Davis. Here's my next clue. That's also by Stuart Davis. Notice how they all look kind of alike? And then this last one is by a different artist. His name is Richard Lawrence. And there's something that's the same about this as the others. And now the last clue, I'd like you to close your eyes. Everybody's eyes closed. Okay, I'm going to close mine too. And we're going to listen to this clue. Close your eyes. And we can open our eyes, but still listening.
City.
Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you can figure out what all of those had to do with each other.
It sounded like a city with trains everywhere.
It sounded that way, and didn't the pictures look that way too? Right. All of these pictures have to do with city, and that's what we're going to do today. We are going to create our own city out of cut paper. It's called collage. Our bold lines are going to be the streets of our city. So there are some directions on the board behind me. Some of you are beginning to learn how to do a little reading, and so I numbered the directions, and I can remind you what the steps are as we work today. Today, step 1 is the same as step 1 was last week. Who remembers what's the first thing we do when we go to our seat and we get our whiteboard? It's number 1 on the board up here behind me. Yes? Your name goes on the back. So I'm going to turn this over on the back and write my name. And I'm going to put a 2 just because I'm working with you right now. So we have my name in room 2 on the back. And then at your table, there are 2 streets, black papers that are going to be your streets. And I have a couple rules today about the streets. The streets have to start at one side, like your bold line did last week, and it has to end at the other side. But, ooh, look at that. That street doesn't go all the way across. What can I do to this street without cutting it to make it end here, or at the top, or at the bottom? Anybody have a plan? What do you think?
Use a blue square.
Add on to it? That's a good idea, but that's not in my rule. In my rule, this piece of the street actually has to touch another side of the board. What's your idea?
You can put another one.
Oh, can't add on to it. That's a good idea too. But this exact part of the street right here has to come and touch a part of the board.
It does not have to touch the end of the board because...
It does have to touch the end of the board. That's the rule. It doesn't have to touch this side of the board. It could touch this side of the board,
Any side of the board.
or it could touch this side of the board. So what do you think?
Can you turn it?
I could. How about if I tilt it and make it a little diagonal like that? If I go there, now, what a good brain you have. That's excellent. Now, it does go off here, and see how it's sticking up there? We have a plan for that. All you have to do is bend it back, fold it like that, and well, no, actually, we're just going to cut it off. Maybe like that. Yeah? Now to make these look more like streets, I'm going to come back and glue it in a second, but to make them more like streets, at your desk there's a little cup with some white crayons. When you go driving with mom or dad or grandma or whoever you drive with and you're on the streets, what do you notice is usually right down the middle of a street? Mm-hmm. Lines, right. So we're going to make those white sort of dotted lines going right down the middle of this street here before I glue it. I like to do it before I glue. You don't have to. I just like to. And as long as I'm doing that one, I might as well do this one at the same time. And then we're going to talk about gluing, because this is the first time you boys and girls have glued in the art room this year. I want you to count with your fingers how many drops of glue I use. This is special glue. It's really strong. I'm only going to put glue in the corners. So I go 1, that's 1 finger. You're counting with your fingers. Actually hold them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 in the middle, and I'm going to kind of roll it there. Then the toothpick goes back on this little white board there so the table doesn't get all messed up. And I just lay it down. So I have a nice bold line for my first street. Second street, I can make this go anywhere. But I'm going to have a car eventually, and I'd like my car to be able to drive on both streets, so I want to connect the streets. So maybe I'll do that one. How's that look? Does that look pretty good?
Good.
Okay, it's hanging over, and so I'm going to do what I did last time. You're right. I'm going to bend that and just snip it off. Our street is done, or streets are done. And now we're ready for the fun part of the city. And that's number 3. Yeah, this says buildings. First, we're going to take our buildings and make windows on them. Now, I'm thinking, like you mentioned New York City, I'm thinking that kind of a city. So for my buildings, I'm going to make a lot of windows. You have a marker like this at your table, and there's a tray at your table that has colored rectangles. And what I'd like you to do is take one of each color. So I've got a purple one here, here's a yellow, there's a green, don't need another green, there's an orange. If you want one of these colors that are here on the rug and it's not at your table, you're welcome to come up and get one. So I'm going to kind of test it. If I go I want all my buildings to start at the street and go out. So if my street is crooked, let's look at this one actually. If my street is diagonal like this, instead of lining all my buildings up down here, I want them lined up on the street like this, so that if my front door to my building is here, when the person walks out of the door, they're going to be at the street. Does that make sense? Yeah. So now I'm going to add some windows. Now, there are different ways to make windows, and I'll show you several different ways I was watching as boys and girls in the other classes were making them. Some people made their windows like this as empty squares. Some people made their windows kind of the same, except they colored them in. They almost all did them in rows, because each floor of the office building would be straight across in a row, like that. These kind of windows take a little longer to do. And then the fastest way of all, and this works too, and I noticed that Stuart Davis, in his artwork, made windows this way. He just did straight lines, vertical lines up and down, and then he did crosswise. Now, I wouldn't do all my buildings like this, but I'd probably do 1 or 2 like this, because I'll put a door there.
That's fast.
Because it's fast, yeah, and you can then get on to other things. So I do maybe 1 or 2 like this, and I maybe do 1 or 2 like that, and I might try this kind also. Somebody in the other class noticed that on one of the pictures, I'm not sure which one it was, that some of the buildings had roofs on them that actually had shapes. So what we did was we took a rectangle that was about the same size as one of our buildings. So if I measure that, and it's like right about to there, and I cut it, might make it just a little bit bigger. I could just glue it like that so it looks like a straight across roof in a different color, and that's what these strips are for. I could cut it in a triangle. Does anybody happen to know how to cut a rectangle into a triangle with just one cut? without changing direction. Anybody know that trick? How would I do it?
Find the corner and cut.
Find the corners. I'm going to go from this corner, the bottom corner, to the top diagonal corner up here. Watch what happens. If I do this, I'm going to end up with 2 triangles that I can use as roofs. So there's the first triangle, and if I turn this one upside down, there's another one. And then you have a real quick roof to put on one of your buildings. You might want to try that while you're working. There are other ways to do roofs, and you can do them other ways too. So we've got our streets, then we've got our buildings, and then 4 is we're going to make a truck or a car if you want to. Looking at it from the side where you just see 2 wheels. So I'll show you how to do that. We start out with a small rectangle, much smaller than your buildings. Be sure that your car is not larger than your building. That would look kind of strange, I think. So here's a rectangle. One way to make a truck is to just cut from the middle, straight over and straight up. So I'm going to chop off this top corner. And there I have a truck without its wheels. So there are wheels at your table then that you can glue here and here, 2 wheels, and then this can go driving on your street. So after the buildings are glued, then you would glue your car. The last thing to do are the sounds. Now we can't have real sounds coming out of your art, can we? No, that would be silly. But we do have sound words, and these are cut up and they're at your table. We've got the word beep, honk, crash. We hope there aren't too many crashes in this city. Bang, and toot. And you can choose 1 or 2. I would not put more than 2 probably on your work.
Why?
Who can remind us? What are we going to do first? Hands up. Hand up if you know. Yeah.
I drew the ground.
Name and room number goes first. What do we do second? Streets are 2 streets. If you need help bending the streets, raise your hand. We'll come around and help you with the bending part. That can be a little bit tricky, but a lot of people figured it out themselves. What do we do after we do the streets? What's next? Buildings. Yeah. And then last is the car. Well, second to the last is the car, and last is the words. Now, as you're working, I'm going to put I'll put a picture up on the smartboard of one that I made that was kind of like this. It's not exactly what you're going to be doing, but it'll give you some ideas when you're working. We're ready to go to our seats.